welcome back to Search Sean. And this is another Chat with Sean episode, and got awesome guests. Really looking forward to this one. I'm sure many of you are. But before I get into it, obviously we did a housekeeping as usual, some of the usual updates on the channel. So we've had so many people on. It's been fantastic lately, but we've had Dan Taylor on recently from the Salt Agency. And yeah, it was really good chat. So definitely all the links will be in the description, but definitely go and check that one out. We've had a recent Real Talk with Sean episode. So obviously the panel-based shows were joined by Liv Day, Jerry White, Itamar Blauer. And yeah, it was fantastic. And then we also had a couple on from AMSIF Agency. You've probably seen her on the channel before. We had Jamie D'Alessandro on, and we had Josh Squires as well. And it was an awesome chat. It was a longer one, but it was really, all those chats are fantastic. So I really do recommend going and checking them out. And like I say, all the links will be in the description. So just go and watch them. And then also recently, I've been trying to do this. It's not grown much yet, but it's work in progress. But we've got a WhatsApp channel now. So for all the latest channel updates and also general SEO and AI news updates, I'm trying to post them on there. So if you want kind of regular updates on what's coming up, what's just been on the channel, also the general industry updates, then you can follow the channel on WhatsApp, and the link will be in the description. So yeah, that's all the admin out the way, and we'll get into it now. I'm joined today by Jono Alderson. Many of you will know him, and he's an independent technical SEO consultant and co-founder of the Days of the Year website. So yeah, thanks for joining me today.
No, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. I'd forgotten we were going to talk about Days of the Year. I was just looking up what it is, and it's National Banana Lovers Day. That's a good one. Bananas are a bit underwhelming though. They're kind of very boring.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, some days I'm in the mood for one, and then I think you have to be. It's kind of one of them fruits you just have to be in the mood for. But they go well with other things, don't they? So it's in a cereal or in a smoothie or something.
I read a thing, and I'm going to struggle to make this relevant to the rest of the conversation now, but I read a thing a while ago which spoiled bananas for me, which is that they're all genetically identical. They're essentially cloned. So you're just eating the same banana over and over and over again, which I guess has some goes into the whole kind of depth of content marketing angle, which we can come on to later. Bananas solve problem.
Yeah, no, interesting. And yeah, just if you haven't checked out already, the link will be in the description, but Jono has like a fantastic blog. Obviously share them on LinkedIn, but they're incredible, like so in depth and detailed about certain topics in the industry. So many have come across it, but it's an awesome blog. So check that one out. Yeah, we get into it. We got a few topics to go over as usual. I try and, base them on things that you're discussing and talking about generally. But, the first one's quite a general topic, but what do you make of the current search landscape and where do you think it's going? It seems like everyone has different answers to this. So I'd be very interested to see your point of view.
And it's not a small question, right? I think, what do I think of the current landscape and where it's going? I think we are in the middle of, I think we're at the end of what has been quite a slow transformation into the next era of how people search and what that means. So I think we start out a bit and go back in time. Until the dawn of the search engine, let's call that, 2000 for a rounding error, all marketing was based on the premise that I can shout at an audience, distract and disrupt them enough to get them to cross my threshold into my store, whether that's a physical store or an e-commerce store, at which point I control the narrative. And I can tell them my stories, I can convince them that I'm the best, and I can maybe sell a subset of them a thing. Then what happens suddenly is we enter an age when an all-knowing system, to a degree, starts to disintermediate that relationship. And I can't just shout at an audience and convince them to enter my store. I have to first pass the tests of whatever this system is. And historically in Google, that was, a combination of PageRank, reputation, all these other signals. In the ads world, and scores, etc. Similar. All of it in Amazon is different criteria. All these systems have a quality or fit criteria, for want of a better phrase. And for the last 10, 15 years, the game has been make your stuff good enough to pass those thresholds so that you can continue to access and shout at an audience. And now what's happened is we start to reach the end of that era. I think that's where we are. I think those days are almost done, because today and tomorrow, you can't, it's about convincing that machine that you're a good fit. It's about authentically being a good fit, because the machine is now smart enough, or at least aware enough, and has enough context and context windows and data and access to and insight to everything, that it can do a far better job of evaluating whether a thing is legitimately a good fit, which includes not just your website and the things you say and the stories you tell and shout at an audience, but everything that everyone else says about you and everything that's encoded societally, and the impact of what gets said on Reddit and the billboards that run outside people's offices. All of these things suddenly now become considered. So the landscape starts to shift accordingly, because the tactics that people use today to convince the machines that they were going to take, all content marketing as we've known it for the last decade, which is just put some articles on my website which feature the right keywords as a hack to appear relevant rather than necessarily authentically and legitimately being relevant, cease to work as well, because the machines are smart enough to see. And we enter the death of marketing as we know it, where until today it's been about manipulating humans to convince them that we're good. And now it's about convincing machines. And we're just transitioning through that journey now. And it's a bit of a hardship for some people, but I think it's been the journey we've been on for a while. People have just been competing in those narrower and narrower edges where you could get away with doing it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It's so fantastic put. I totally agree. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think that's, like you say, before big companies could just kind of bypass anyone with enough money could bypass any of that stuff by shouting, like you say, loud enough or paying it off. But now it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that. So it's going to be very interesting in terms of how companies shift in that way.
I think that's a really fascinating point, because money still remains a huge axis here. So where the big companies historically could essentially pay to play, right? I think you could buy links, whether you do it directly or you hand the power money to an agency and say, go do some digital PR, you're still just buying links. You can buy awareness. You can buy your way around a whole bunch of these things. You can generate 1,000 articles, whereas a less cash rich competitor can only generate 10. You can definitely convert money into advantage. But where the current tactics of that stop working, I think there is still a pay-to-play angle here, which is essentially branding, want of a better phrase, where you can run a bunch of billboards, throw some ads on TV, advertise on every single podcast, sponsor content across the web, buy off influencers, whatever else, in ways that create signals that these systems will evaluate. And yes, maybe some of them are slightly more transparent than others, but some of them look like good marketing and might in fact be good marketing. Those things will still influence the machine. So the big brands, it's not a huge pivot for them to just say, you know what, we'll just slightly change where we're spending. And smaller brands are going to struggle because they can't run billboards as easily. That's going to be a really interesting subset of SEO, where we start saying, instead of how do I rank for this keyword and what content should I produce, we have to be having conversations around what kind of above the line marketing and advertising do I need to do in order to change the market's perception of my brand and to influence salience and awareness in a way that changes how people search, which is very different from how do I rank first for the keyword they already search for. It's a bit alien, but I think that's going to become a bigger space, especially for the brands who have the budgets to try and manipulate that. Manipulate's an interesting word, but to manage it, I guess.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, it's true, actually. Like we've seen with the data that's coming out from Hrefs and stuff around the importance of that brand searching and the brand mentions and all that kind of thing. So like you say, that's going to play a big part. Yeah, I'm seeing that in my own data in my industry. You know, the bigger brands are getting more of the share in these current early days of this shift. So yeah, I'm hoping, I think generally, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, I think generally the way it's going would be better, especially for the user, if it does it in the right way. I think it will be better for the user, but obviously some of the smaller publishers and that are going to struggle, which may not be good for the ecosystem of the internet, I guess. But then again, you know, Dan Taylor was kind of saying, well, maybe some of them just, it's nice to have a level playing field, but actually maybe some of them just aren't as good as the bigger websites generally. So maybe it's not a bad thing. It's just the way it's going to go. It's just natural sort of evolution, I guess.
I agree. I think it's super interesting. I think that capitalism is not a perfect system, but there are things that it does quite well, and one of them is competition. That said, there are definitely risks and definitely unknowns. And I think maybe what we end up with is a really weirdly bifurcated market where the giants succeed because they just buy influence awareness, and the small, agile niche players win because they can authentically be the best in their very small space. But anything in the middle that's a kind of average company with an average product that's marketing to kind of broad pool of people without a real clear message and differentiation, they're definitely going to struggle. And whilst part of me definitely agrees that, okay, maybe they didn't deserve to succeed and maybe we're better off in the market without sub-average players, that does do weird things economically and socially. And it all sorts of kind of nasty stuff happens when you just destroy the middle of the market. And I don't think anybody really has a good answer for what do we do about this, either legislatively or commercially, or never mind SEO technically. So yeah, that scares me a bit. But I think a great shakeup isn't necessarily the worst thing. I think a lot of businesses at the moment online, particularly those who have used SEO as their primary channel for a decade or so, maybe aren't the best businesses in the world. And maybe your ability to publish articles isn't necessarily indicative of the inherent quality of your product. Yeah, maybe some of that should go away. I don't think we'll be worse for that.
Yeah, it's very a lot of nuances involved around it, isn't it? It really does depend, but it's going to be interesting. Just going on to, obviously, it's kind of following on for what we just discussed, but how do we shape the machine generated narrative over time? Because obviously it's a total different kettle of fish now, as you were saying.
That's great. So the toolkit we've had to date has been quite blunt, and it's been very focused on Google, and it's been, can I get more good links? And secondarily, can I anchor that in some reasonable content? And maybe tertiary, can I bully enough journalists to draw some attention to it? And then suddenly what happened, you go, as we touched on just now, the remit is affect the entire social subconscious, for want of a better phrase, of the perception of our brand and our products and our reputation. And suddenly things like, what's the quality of our packaging suddenly affects things, because people on Reddit complain, or a YouTube review mentions a competitor more favorably than you, or things like your pricing becomes an integral part of your SEO strategy, because if you're more expensive than competitors, the systems that are evaluating you and whether they should recommend you understand that in a way that Google was never really great at, and will just put you lower down the list if you're there at all. And the worst possible outcome of all these scenarios isn't even necessarily that you get mentioned in a negative light versus competitors. It's just that you don't get mentioned at all, because there's a finite window here for them to say, oh, I think that these three things are a good fit. And if you're not the best, the cheapest, the fastest, the best, whatever slices it's doing, it's visible. And if we go back to what we were saying earlier about the fundamental model being based on the premise of shouting an interruption in order to steer people to the funnel, you don't have access to the audience. They're never exposed to you, so you miss out entirely. So we find ourselves in a landscape where suddenly, over half of your website traffic is probably bots, and a decent chunk of that are probably bots which are inventorying, evaluating, and using that content, not in isolation, but in combination with everything else, to build a perception of how good is your thing, what do you sell, how relevant are you? And managing that is now a huge job compared to the work that SEO has done historically, that touches on almost every aspect of the business. Like if the CEO's got a bad reputation, or if you don't open on Tuesdays and your competitors do, all of these things suddenly start to matter. So you start needing to understand and map it, and monitor it, and influence it. And what you end up with is something that I think probably looks much more like traditional PR, but married with the best bits of digital PR, which I don't mean just shilling infographics, but actually understanding the dynamics of equity and authority and reputation on the web, and how publishers and journalists are involved with that, and how equity lives at page and URL level rather than necessarily the brand name. Yeah, all of this stuff. Maybe a marrying of the best of SEO's focus on how do we make great web pages, PR's focus on how do we tell great stories, and digital PR's focus on how do we get the right equity to the right places. Some combination of that, I think, starts to give you the fuel that affects whether the machines believe what you say or not. But it also needs to broaden our scope radically, because we've only ever done that in the context of our websites and our pages. And suddenly now you need to also be doing it on an internet scale, like that Wikipedia article, that Reddit post, that TikTok video. All of these things are fuel that the machines will consume. So you can make your own website, say whatever you want, but it's a drop in the ocean against all of this other stuff. And if that disagrees with you or doesn't actively reinforce it, and is in turn reinforced by other websites with links reinforcement, then these machines aren't going to believe you. So you've got to do the work to be convincing, which is super hard, and it's a very different game.
Yeah, some great points. I mean, I think we've seen that before in larger brands, even if they've got terrible Trustpilot scores and bad reviews on Reddit everywhere, they seem to thrive still because they can drown that out with just, marketing and directed adverts and all that kind of thing. They doesn't affect them. But, I'm sure everyone's done this now, where you go into the large language models and you can start comparing yourself against your competitors or just certain topics and saying, who would you recommend for this or whatever? And then also digging into why they said that, why they recommended those particular companies, why did they look at these particular set of metrics and stuff. And like you say, things like Trustpilot scores come up, things like referencing from Wikipedia or from articles in the press or whatever. So yeah, I think it's fascinating. I've just done a video and I'm sure it'll be out soon with looking into Wikipedia. But one of the things come out of it is that I think it's from a study from Profound, but it found that Wikipedia was the biggest website reference for like health related sort of queries. So, if you have a Wikipedia page or you're mentioning any other Wikipedia page and stuff, that will be highly influential. So, it's like you say, you got to look far beyond your website's scope. So do you think brand management will be like a bigger kind of role in the future?
Yeah, and I haven't heard it framed using those words, but I really like that. Brand management is like an active thing that we do. Like, how are we perceived? Where are we present? What do people say and think? I think that's maybe what SEO should have been doing for quite some time. If you consider the objective of Google and now these new machines is surface the best result for the problem for the audience at the time, yada, 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 then managing your brand probably feels like a better thing to have been doing than getting links to articles. I think that's probably the more zoomed out thing. And yeah, it has the same kind of questions about, okay, the surface area is much broader, both in terms of not just our website, but the whole web, but also the business. Like, you can have the best articles in the world on your website with all the links, but if your product market fit is bad, or if you have a terrible reputation for your customer service, then those things are going to hinder you. I think one of the interesting challenges is that many of the businesses that exist today, perhaps almost all of them, aren't designed to account for this. They're not inherently built to reward quality or attention to detail. So things like, I don't know, how many SEOs have ever said we should take some of our budget for content marketing this month and instead take it on training the customer support team? And it's never happened. But now suddenly that's a thing, because the bad experiences that people have on the phone are going to be ranking factors, for want of a better phrase. They're going to influence your visibility, your propensity to be recommended. All of these things matter. It's all brand management. I really like.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I won't give too many. I mean, the company actually doesn't exist much anymore, but it, we saw it that we started off with a startup. We started off very well. We were doing great sales. We were growing like beyond our belief, really. But then with that becomes more phone calls, then it becomes more problems, more complete. And then we wasn't dealing with it very well. And the bad reviews started coming in. So yeah, I actively was trying to help management, trying to, one, answer those queries on the website, be a bit more informative on our socials and stuff like that. So it is a connective strategy. It has to be. And yeah, I think now even more than before that it will be the case that you have to be more aligned with all your different sections of your team, whether that's social, whether that's your customer service team that's dealing with reviews and calls or whatever. And yeah, and if you haven't got a team, if you are just like a small startup, then you're somehow going to have to balance your time to make sure you're on top of all that stuff.
Yeah. The other really scary bit is you can't afford to get it wrong, because these bad reviews and similar are now effectively permanent. Well, in today's world, people forget and stuff gets glossed over and it gets buried. And as you say, you can run TV ads and throw marketing money at distractions and pointing people in the other way. But ChatGPT and these systems will encode these perceptions and probably reference the explicit content and URLs of these incidents indefinitely. And they might maybe downweight them over time, gradually, but these things are going to become permanent records. So it's not even as if you can go, okay, we were growing our business and we lost control for a little bit. We got a bunch of bad reviews, but we fixed it and now we're better because those reviews still matter and they're still relevant. And the machines are still going to consider those when they recommend stuff or don't. So you have to get it right first time, which I think makes it super, super scary for small businesses. Yeah, especially going through those kind of scaling processes where you learn as you go. Well, one mistake there might mean you're permanently scarred.
I was going to say about the archives, that's the thing, because ChatGPT is bringing up stuff from like 2014 and so on and so forth. They can find everything. So, you really kind of part of that brand management is you're going to have to go through the archives and see what kind of stuff's there and see if you can actually affect it in any way. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's hard. That's not an envious job. That's not small.
And that's the thing with, again, mainly for bigger companies and medium-sized companies is where does that responsibility lie? Is that SEO's job? Is that customer service job? Is that, it's going to be tricky. I think this is the conversations that teams are going to have in where that responsibility lies going forward. And in terms of, we have touched upon it a lot, but I will put it in this way because it might be the case that you've got more to add, but how do we adapt our strategies for a web where machines evaluate and connect individual claims rather than treating whole pages as a unit of trust and authority? Obviously, we have touched upon it a bit, but is there any more strategies that you would recommend?
Nice. Yeah. I think there's a few bits to this, but I think it's an extension of that brand management role, but perhaps a little more tactical, where you really surgically go around the web and try and evaluate all the places that you're mentioned on, you're not, and the exact wording and the exact framing, and you try and drag that all into line. So, I don't know, years ago, your company probably updated their logo or their slogan or advanced into a new product line or internationalized it. And you've got this discordant history scattered across the web of all the different versions of those narratives and presentations, etc. I think getting on top of that is going to be super important. And more broadly, having a real laser focus on being able to articulate what is the name and identity of our brand and what is it that we do, which you would think would be something that most organizations would be able to do, but it turns out that's super, super hard. Probably that subset of kind of medium-sized, mediocre businesses who are just kind of bumbling along. But actually, to really get extreme clarity on who are we and what do we do and who for and what ways and how do we differentiate, and to be able to articulate that precisely and then to go out across the whole web and seed and reinforce that wherever you're mentioned, so that when you get your Wikipedia link or when your CEO does an interview on a podcast or when your products are reviewed by an independent third party, they start to use that same language consistently because it's so embedded, then the machines start to pick that up and understand it. But I think that's another great question about whose job is, because that's, again, is it PR, is it brand, is it SEO, yada, all the same kind of challenges that just aren't owned at the moment. Like actively managing how your brand is represented across the web and through tying, super tricky.
Yeah. And, I've used the example a few times, but there was one case that someone told me about, like a service location, and they were trying to really push it. And then they found that, just doing some research on ChatGPT, I think it was, and they found that they were picking up an article where they said it was shut down in like 2014 or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's exactly like, you got to be careful. Okay, we all know that like ChatGPT that only have like 1% of the market right now, but it's like, it's going to be similar across the board when they roll out AI mode a lot more and stuff. So
ChatGPT is the sharp end of it, but it will become the new normal, definitely.
Yeah. And like I say, do your own research, like look at the sources that they are looking at. I try and do it across the board from AI mode to Grok to Perplexity and just seeing what vast range of sources they look at to pull their information from, because it will differ from industry, you know.
And funny you should mention that. The other bit which keeps me awake at night is you've got to assume that if success requires you to actively manage how your brand is positioned and perceived across all of these places and all of these surfaces, you've got to assume that everybody else is doing a bit of that as well. And you've got to assume that some of them aren't necessarily ethical, nice people doing nice things. I think you assume that the corpus of the web is a hostile environment and that your competitors are probably working just as hard as you are to say that they're better and that they're the best. And maybe some of them are saying nasty things about you, or they are linking to that scandal you had in 2014, or they're kind of unpicking your work as you go around. You can't assume that you're just nicely doing litter picking around the web. You've got to assume that everybody's in a fight here. That terrifies me, because the impact that has on the web and how much this all just becomes a propaganda war on Wikipedia, on Reddit, on YouTube, on all these areas to produce and maintain all of this evidence, whether it's real or not at scale, to come into the systems, is going to be the next version of link building. And in the same way that link building has had a whole bunch of perverse, unpleasant effects on the content web, in that we, I don't know, killed directories, killed comments, killed articles, killed the ability to trust anything you read online, distorted the entire rest. But all of these types of things are going to happen, but it's going to be even worse because it's going to be across the canvas of the entire web. So that's, that's deeply concerning.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I believe the intention is right. I think it will be better generally for the internet and for users if it's done in the right way. But obviously, like you say, right now, a lot of people say it's a bit like the Wild West. You know, we're going back to where listicles have such a strong influence on results and that kind of thing. And that's not really a step forward. That's definitely a backward step. If you can get mentioned on a few listicles and you're known as one of the, because it's kind of what I referenced in my Wikipedia video. It's like, just because a few people say it's the best thing does not mean that's truth, you know. And this is the problem we have on the internet and generally in society, because we're being told so many things on TV or any form of marketing, and then we go to websites, these are the best. But is it actually based off factual information, or is that just people being paid off, or just they've got a nice friendship or a partnership, or they've got a stake in it?
And the best for who, right? For which audience, for which locale, for which day of the week, for which yada. There is no best. Actually, I mean, this is one of the things that LLMs, etc., will do a better job of than Google, where Google's ecosystem assumes there is one answer for every query. I think with the increasing influence of personalization and history and context, I think these systems might do a better job of understanding that there's a much more fractured space, and that best for me is different than best for you. And there's all sorts of external stimulus and things that make them different. So yeah, I think maybe the ability to kind of crudely hack that top 10x is a short-term thing. I don't know. I did see, you mentioned AMSIV in the intro. Lily Ray did a thing a while ago where she put a fake top list of like food facts for SEO. And now ChatGPT insists that I eat the most pasta out of all the SEOs. It might be true for now, but yeah, you just create truths.
Yeah, well, pasta's good. I guess it'll be worth. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I hope it obviously sorts out. And like you say, with personalization increasing, then I think that's a good point. Obviously, I'm worried about personalization because the echo chamber sort of situation. Yeah, that's a big concern of mine. But yeah, and like you say, with the brand thing, like a lot of brands, I do think struggle in actually saying, like on a post-it note, actually what they do, you know. And like you say, like, or about the elevator pitch, like if you can't put it into like a sentence, what you do, then, and a lot of companies, you go on their website and you actually try and find out who they are and what they do. It's actually really difficult to determine what their USP is, what their, actually who they are. And companies have got to get a lot smarter with that, or they're not going to keep up.
Yeah.
This was a really interesting one. It caught my eye, and I read about it obviously on your blog, but the hollow universe. So do you want to describe what that is, and then are we already in it?
So this is a wildfire fancy went down a rabbit hole. I wrote, I guess, a sci-fi short story that was a kind of exploration of what's happening with Google and the search industry now and what that might mean if you extrapolated it out to a galactic scale. No, it's a bit silly, but I think it did a reasonable job of exploring the challenge of the removal of the incentive of publishers to publish, which anyone who's spent more than a second in the AI space looking at this will have come across, which is that if Google and ChatGPT and all these other players build their businesses and processes and revenue streams on the premise of extracting information from the web and repackaging it, for better or worse, for want of a better phrase, rebundling it and then serving it back to the user in a way which removes the incentive for the users of those platforms or the ability of those users to access the original in a way that the publisher of that would have monetized. Why should I publish? So if Google takes all of my news articles and just shows them in the search results and I don't get any traffic, then none of my ads get eyeballs. Or if they just answer the questions that my problem solves in the search results as well, and I don't get clicks that might have converted to leads, then why should I produce that content in the first place? In the short term, this probably isn't the end of the world, probably because we're still fairly early on and a lot of this content already exists because it's been produced. But if all those businesses and organizations stop producing content tomorrow, then what does the internet look like a year or 5 years from now? And there are two big problems there. One is that the AI systems and LLMs will inevitably start consuming and training on their own content and output, which is not good. Not good technically, because then awful things come in the model and they get really bad and inaccurate, and not good existentially because all the content at the moment is the stuff that the SEO industry has been producing for 10 years and it's all garbage. It's all top 8 tips for whatever you wouldn't believe what happens next, 12 great reasons you should invest in teeth whitening, yada, yada, yada. Trillions of pages across the web. Very little of it is inherently good. And if you were to zoom out and see what does a societally good corpus of information look like, it's probably not the internet as it is today. So having today's frozen static internet become the source of all foundation of training for the rest of humanity's time probably isn't great. And then also the kind of socioeconomic impact of what happens if we disincentivize publishers, either little publishers and newspapers or and then dentists, doctors, bloggers who are writing stuff. What happens to all of their income streams? What happens to their websites? What happens to freedom of speech? What happens to independent journalism? What happens to the link graph? To get tactical for a moment, for all of these websites which invest in and rely on today links from journalists' websites and Wikipedia, etc. If those sites go away, what happens to the conventional SEO ecosystem and how sites get ranked, evaluated, and judged? All of this stuff breaks in really, really quite fundamentally unpleasant ways. And nobody really has an answer to what we do about it, socially, economically. Google certainly hasn't done a great job of saying, and here is the new model to monetize, and here are new value exchange formats. There are some examples. So Cloudflare is doing some stuff at the moment where they might try and enforce micropayments for AI systems extracting content. I think it's a lot of PR noise that's going to be super hard to enforce. I know Perplexity is doing some stuff with some revenue share stuff, but only if you use their browser. So we're all not particularly impressed. So all of that said, the whole universe was an interesting extrapolation of what happens if you zoom that out and you assume that the entity that we definitely won't call Google for legal reasons just solves everything for you in ways that aren't obvious nor innocuous and aren't necessarily evil, but just convenient, to the point where then convenience tips to the point where their solving of things replaces the things. And suddenly all of the experiences we might have had and places we might have gone and things we might have done are just synthesized for us with kind of genuine, really good virtual versions. So the answers that Google generates for those kinds of queries and the AI thing in the story synthesizes for you are unnoticeably as good as the original, but at the cost of the death of all innovation and originality and novelty and wanderlust and maybe forms of freedom that we don't even notice we've lost until they've gone. All of this, I don't think it's necessarily evil. I think that Google have done a terribly bad job of reacting to Bing's moves, who are reacting to ChatGPT. All of this has happened very quickly. I think the scale of time we're talking about is nothing. If we're saying we need to invent fundamentally new economic models, we've had milliseconds to do that. But the risk in the short term of us just destroying capitalism is not zero, and that has all sorts of nasty implications. So yeah, I don't have any answers, and I have the same fears everyone else has. I'm hopeful that collectively we might be the right kind of people to be thinking about what do alternatives look like. I quite like the idea of a web that's not as reliant on advertising and banner ads. That feels a bit 90s. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's next. All I know is it's scary. And when you zoom out and you say, where does this lead? It's only bad places.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you think? But you kind of said, no, it's fascinating. And yeah, I mean, it crosses my mind all the time. And again, I have no real answers. All I look at is kind of history and motives. And obviously when you look at the motives of, Google, obviously it seems like they're full on going for it in terms of AI. Like there's no turning back now. That's it. So that's the case. They rely heavily on the ad side of it. So there will still be ads involved. And they've already said that, it's going to be personalized ads in the AI mode.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just don't know. I think people will say, and Itamar did bring up a good point in the sense that, like you said, if Google create this platform that does all the answers for you, you haven't got to go anywhere to book things and do that, which is obviously their aim, and they're starting to bring things in at the moment to do that, then they will probably keep their market share as it is. They will probably continue to keep that market share. So maybe the likes of ChatGPT and stuff won't grow that much in terms of that being that platform for that final sort of conversion or whatever, that final sort of, because people go ChatGPT and it looks like they go ChatGPT and then they go to Google for like making sure it's right or whatever, and it's going to be TikTok. But yeah, like you say with publishers, it's going to be, we've already seen we've already seen the legacy media dying, it's on its knees, like the likes of the big TV channels like CNN and the newspapers, that no one's really buying newspapers anymore. And, I don't know where it's going, but obviously you can look at that and you can see they're all trying to go to this paid model where you've got to pay to read the news.
But it sounds...
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand it, because if anything, they should be going, in my opinion, the other way. If you want people to actually keep on reading legacy media,
you got to open it up.
Yeah, you got to open up. I don't see why they're putting it behind a paid wall, all of them, which is really annoying for me on the news, because most of the stuff I want to cover is behind a paid wall. With those sort of publishers who are covering things on niche topics are really important. Especially you're into a certain topic. Whether that's food,
that creation of information.
Yeah, what's incentivizing them to continue that? I don't know. People aren't going to their website. The only thing would be is if they are selling things and their revenue is okay, because Google's still pushing their products or whatever, still getting that money coming in. Because, the website, we discussed this with the guys from Amsif and with Dan, actually, your brochure, your kind of shop front online, it's still important. So even if you do have a blog, and it still represents who your company is, who you are, what you stand for. So it still has a place, I guess. But will you put as much effort in, if you are, say, a legacy media platform, and we've seen this, is they're not doing it like they used to, where they used to send out, I watched quite a few of these different reporters talking about how they do it, and they don't send out field reporters as much to work on a story for a week in a certain location about a certain thing. It's all very much like quick fire. You go for a day, you can't, because they haven't got the people to use and the time, and yeah, so it's going to be interesting. Then, yeah, we'll see where it goes. Obviously, AI, they've already said, like Elon Musk, I think, said they've already exhausted the amount of data already online. They've already used up all the resource, and now they have to. The AIs are going out doing their own sort of groundwork and their own thesis and their own conclusions on things. And so, yeah, it's already kind of started, I guess, in that sense.
Actually, that's something content, something the SEO industry would never have imagined.
So, we're going to the next one. It's something you've also written about. What is the true nature of a link, and how should we understand it?
I get angry about this. Sorry. I think I'm contentious on links on the best of days. I think that the SEO industry is understandably obsessed with the buying and selling of links, and I dislike that conceptually. I think it's a hack and a shortcut that money and time and an industry gets spent on instead of doing the fundamental underlying work of improving product market fit, of being a better brand, of managing all of those things. I think it's an unpleasant, and I get why it exists, and I get why that money made. I'm semantically annoyed that the industry has normalized the word backlink. And again, I understand why, because it oversimplifies the nature of the thing. And if I were a search engine or an LLM, I might well want to use links to understand citations and relevance and authority, interest, and a bunch of other stuff. But in order to do that, I would evaluate those links. And in evaluating them, I would consider where are they from and where are they to, and who is involved and when was it created and what's on that page and what was on that page yesterday. And has that link been stable and green or blue, and just the domain name rhyme with banana, all these other myriad things. I would build complex models to evaluate, is this a good, useful, relevant, trustworthy link? Is it an inherent authoritative endorsement, etc., etc.? And as soon as we start talking about backlinks, we ignore all of that. We just flatten the concept into a count of incoming links from other places, or at best incoming links from other domains with a certain authority score, depending on your tool of choice. And all of that is explicitly designed to make the selling and buying of links easier and simpler at a way which overlooks all of the important things and the reason that you're buying those links, directly or indirectly or commissioned digitally, or however you're doing it, which is that the search engine system is trying to understand all of that complexity and all of that context and moving parts. And the value of the link is a combination of where it's from and where it's to and everything about those endpoints. The value of the link is the link between those 2 points. And we've stupefied that to make it easy to buy and sell at scale. And I think that does an incredible disservice to all of the good work that the industry does around information architecture and making good experiences and fixing terrible websites, etc. And it annoys the heck out of me that we've dumbed it down and made it a stupid commodity because it's easier to sell and make money. And I know there are many people who operate in this space, and they're not inherently evil, and they understand, but it feels grimy. I think that is morally and ethically grey at best, and I think we should demand and do better.
Yeah, it's backlinks seems like almost a dirty word when you talk about it in the SEO world now. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, do you think with the way that AI is going to be learning patterns and learning connections between different entities and websites and, who they are and what they do and that kind of thing, having a better understanding of that, do you think the role of the link will change and evolve?
I hope so. I think what those systems don't have yet and might not have either for a while or ever is all of Google's spam detection processes. Google is already phenomenally good at ignoring manipulative links, for better or worse. I think ChatGPT and similar are very bad at that, which is why things like top lists and articles still work, etc. But they do have alternatives, right, as you hint, which is the ability to kind of fuzzy process brand authority and relevant and utility and reputation, a bunch of other things in a way that Google really struggles to do and will, I think, for a long time struggle to do because concepts like PageRank are so deeply embedded in their architecture. Whereas ChatGPT maybe can just say, you know what, don't even try, just evaluate it page by page by looking at the pixels on the word. They could use fundamentally different approaches. So yeah, maybe they do a far better job at understanding, is this page authoritative, than Google would with the same kind of inputs. Maybe they don't need links in them. Maybe. That said, I think we're a long way off that. And for now, going to be very susceptible to the same kind of spam that Google has got good at ignoring.
Yeah, just going off a bit, what do you make of AI mode? Are you a fan? How are you finding it so far?
I think it's nearly there. I think there's a few weird things to it. Like, one is that many of the types of queries you have don't require an agentic AI response. They just need an answer, which actually sorting 3 or 4 of the best possible links in some kind of order would be more useful. I think psychologically, there's a lot to be said about the illusion of choice, and that handing me a list of links from that I have to choose from, in some respects is friction, but in some it's quite important. I think that as a human, I like to think I'm in control of my research and decision-making processes, even whilst I'm in the process of handing off large chunks of it. Right? Picking a link is probably subconsciously quite valuable. So losing that, I don't like being told what to think necessarily. I also think it's an interesting throwback on Google's emphasis on performance. I think we've had 20 years of Google shouting about how many fractions of milliseconds they're shaving off the time it takes to return a page of search results. And now you have to wait 5 seconds? That can't be comfortable for them. So it's a weird kind of experiential diversion. And again, there are many of the types of things I'm searching for. I'm conditioned to want it quickly. And I'm conditioned to go, okay, I'm going to pick a link I recognize. It's a radical shift. And I wonder if that shift in UX will ever feel normal. I guess it might for people who haven't been embedded in the space for quite as long as we have. But yeah, it's a weird thing. I think definitely there's some scenarios where it makes sense, but not for general usage.
Yeah, and it is fascinating because, and yeah, sometimes you have to like remove yourself from being that SEO person because we are fixated on things like that because we've been told and by Google and stuff. But actually, like we know from general behaviors, user online behaviors, that people's patience are a lot less than they've ever been before. So yeah, even like you say, when I'm being told that I'm thinking, I'm like, just hurry up.
Yeah, I think it's like the library, right? Imagine going to a library in 2025, then imagine you do, and your choice is either just go to the shelf where you know the book you want probably is and find it, or have to ask for a librarian to turn up, and they turn up after 5 minutes of you waiting, and then you have to have a chat with them whilst they kind of discuss and give their opinion. Sometimes that is exactly the right experience, but not always, and probably not even often. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, and I do feel like ever since Google kind of had to be forced to go into this AI world as quick as they probably wanted, that they've kind of just gone against a lot of their usual ethics and best practices and their kind of ethos. They kind of like had to go against it just to roll out this AI product that they think is the best option. And perhaps it is the best one, but
they have to double down on it. They can't admit that it's not perfect. They can't do anything other than say that it will be better tomorrow and that it's constantly shipping. Because as soon as they do the stock market will crash and heads will roll. They have to pretend it's perfect.
Yeah, definitely. Basically, again, I'm going off what you've kind of said recently is, why does semantic HTML form the foundation of a resilient, high performance and accessible web?
I'm a web dev by nature, and I'm very opinionated about this stuff. I think that the last 15 years or so, we have in many ways made the web objectively worse. I think the rise of the JavaScript framework that started with Angular and has ended with React and Vue and Vercel has created a overly complex, brittle, dev-centric internet. If you want to go build a website for your startup tomorrow, you're going to be hiring a front-end dev wizard who's going to build a house of cards on a pile of sand on a chain of dependencies that's going to do some awful client-side rendered, bloated JavaScript app that's going to ship 12 meg of JavaScript before it starts painting any pixels on the screen, that Google's going to struggle to understand, and that ChatGPT and other ecosystems, other platforms, aren't going to be able to parse and extract content from at all. And you're going to spend the next 3 years, even though your developer says it'll be 6 months, unpicking and retrofitting the thing to make sure that it's server-side rendered, that the stuff turns up initially in the DOM, that it's inherently fast, and that you turn it back into what it always would have been had it just been a PHP app running on a conventional server. And this is the kind of broad trend that we see the web going through at the moment, where we're having to unapify everything. And there are many good reasons why the web ended up that way. And there was a period of and then maybe 2012 to 2016 or so, where it might have been the right architectural choice because browsers sucked and a whole bunch of other things and the capabilities were limited. But now today, we've got this cult of JavaScript, which seems to have, which builds apps instead of websites, and those words have become interchangeable, and that's hugely problematic. And they do all of this to prioritize and preference their own experiences whilst building the thing over the experiences of the end users and systems consuming the thing. And I think that is criminally negligent. And the industry has got away with it for a decade because Google has been smart enough to cope. And we see the leaps and strides they take in going, okay, we can render JavaScript, we can manage it. And they really struggle still. And there's an inherent cost to all of that. And it's inherently slower, it's inherently less accessible, it's inherently less performance, it's inherently more brittle. And the amount of work that you need to do to retrofit it is inordinately more than you would have done to have just done it right in the first place. So high horse. I don't know if ChatGPT, etc., will ever invest the amount of resources required to render and parse JavaScript-based content, etc., in the same way that Google does, because it is 10 times more expensive, 100 times more expensive than just requesting a URL and extracting the HTML. And when you start to look, therefore, at what best practice looks like, it is about semantic HTML. It's about the code that you put into a web page mattering, and it mattering whether that's an H1 or an H3 or a div or a strong tag, not because those things are inherently better or worse for SEO, but because if all the context that these systems have is the code that they extract from the page and then the content that they tokenize from that, all of the bloat and all of the ambiguity and all of the divs within divs within divs within divs within divs with mountains of tailwind classes and locked behind 20 meg of inline CSS, all of this, all of that, they're all barriers to those systems being able to reliably and consistently extract and understand. Never mind the performance implications. You fast forward to a year or two from now when agentic stuff is maybe more common, and I make a query, and it goes and does a bunch of query fan art stuff, and those agents query other agents, which get stuff from websites, which they bring back and they evaluate, and they pass to another agent, which evaluates, blah, 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 blah. If those interactions take 4 seconds each and each generate 20 megabytes of JavaScript, there's no way those systems include you. Yet your whole architecture is built on this noise and this super niche. So I think a return to basics, not because old-fashioned it used to be better when it was the GeoCities ages, but because the browser is no longer our enemy. And a lot of the incentives that reward JavaScript-based building are wrong and bad and should go away. A lot of the reasons that are cited to be using those kinds of approaches aren't good business reasons. They're good developer reasons, maybe not even then. And yet we've trained an entire generation of people who've come out of university thinking that React is the way that we build websites. React is the way we build apps, and that we've confused the two is bad. So I think having faster, more accessible, more standards compliant, more interoperable, more simple websites that, maybe a marketer could be able to change an H1 tag without taking 4 developers in a month. That would be nice. That'd be nice for everyone. It'd be nice for the web, be nice for the planet, and the amount of carbon we're burning, all of this stuff. Yeah, most websites are bad. They're built wrong by the wrong people, building the wrong things in the wrong ways. And we've got away with it because Google's been smart and ChatGPT isn't.
Yeah. No, I loved it. It's great. Really good, really strong points. And I totally agree. I honestly think this might be really unpopular. But I think generally, and maybe this could go across the entire digital marketing, we've overcomplicated many things. It actually isn't that complicated when we look at human to human interaction and marketing generally. People have been doing it since hundreds of years.
We had print, a websites are not more complicated than print. We're putting pixels on a 2D plane. That is not complicated.
Yeah, but we've overcomplicated so much because, like you say, we're trying to sell something or try to keep ourselves in a job or something along those lines. And I think maybe now that's all going to start to unravel and things are going to have to go back to more simplified times. And like you say, okay, Google have kind of cracked it and worked out ways to kind of work around things, but they also, their budgets are being extremely tested at the moment. Obviously, they've got court cases coming out of their ears, and then they also got AI they're trying to push, and that isn't cheap with all the data centers and stuff. And we've seen like indexing kind of change in the way how frequently they index things, how many things they index and stuff. So yeah, it's going to like make people think, I guess. And like, you're not even doing yourself justice either, because if you have got good content on your website, but it's not being picked up because
What a waste, right?
Yeah, what's
You've
the
done the
point,
hard
you know?
work. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not doing yourself justice. There's content there that could be really good, and it won't be picked up, like you say. So, yeah, interesting, and yeah, valid point. So, just lastly, what do you make of the latest changes in Google Ads?
Interesting. So I know very little about the ad space other than they're the enemy. No, they're not. They're great. But I see two interesting trends, I think. One is the gradual removal of control, which is super interesting. Where a decade ago, you would have granularly configured keyword by keyword targeting rules, bid, spend, metrics, exclusions, etc. And now almost all of that is gone. And now you increasingly just kind of pair up audiences to landing pages to products on the premise that Google will do the best possible job of understanding what's an appropriate amount to spend against who, at which moment, in which context, on which surfaces, with which formats, and they just marry it up and it's magical. Now, with the heavy caveat of, at the moment, the reality is starkly different from that. And I know many people are extremely frustrated that it does not do much of that very well. But let's assume that's a temporary thing and that they get smarter and they get there. I think that is super interesting. The idea is that advertising becomes less about spreadsheets of keywords and more about taking advantage of the AI's black box and ability to abstract away specific targeting into broad behavior patterns and audiences and need groups and all of those things in a way which isn't necessarily obvious or intuitive, but the system, by virtue of its nature, does a far better job. I think that is super cool. And it makes advertising more effective, more targeted, and more meaningful, which is all good. Like, I get frustrated with seeing adverts for things that aren't relevant. Maybe that diminishes and we see more relevant ads, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The other thing I think is interesting, quite tactically, it was about 2 weeks or so ago, Google Ads announced that you can set branded impressions as a conversion metric, which I think is fascinating for a bunch of reasons. Because for better or evil, it suddenly means that you can start to understand the role of brand in multi-touch attribution much more effectively. You can say, okay, people didn't click, but they did see us and they were maybe influenced, and that's good enough because we understand that subsequent actions and exposure means that blah, 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 blah. It also kind of unified SEO and PPC in a way that's never really happened before, because if they see a brand impression and then later click organically, you can go, okay, maybe they were influenced because of the exposure effect. And you start to do some more sophisticated marketing there. The worst version of that is maybe brand impressions and branding just becomes a subset of advertising and Google Ads, which is not necessarily great, but maybe it's okay in aggregate. So yeah, I think the interesting implication of that, of both of those together, is that the process of running ad campaigns now looks almost inseparable from the process of brand management, because you're saying, what is the messaging we're putting out to which kind of audiences, with which kind of media, with what messaging, in which platforms, to which pieces of content, and are they going to trust it? Are they going to believe it? Can we do the work to convince the machine that it's legitimately good for this kind of audience and this subset, blah, 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 blah. It's the same kinds of managerial tactics and activity where you're still proving to the system that your thing is a good fit. It's just a different route in. I think that's quite nice and quite elegant.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I was quite heavily involved in paid before I went into SEO kind of full time. And yeah, it was very manual based. It was very, like you say, kind of, keywords and groups and different targeting based on different factors.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be see what the role, obviously, like our roles changing in SEO, becoming more strategic in a way. And then I guess, that brand management thing we discussed earlier, but now like paid roles are going to change a lot, a lot more automation, but then you're going to have to be on top of, you say, like those other aspects rather than just monitoring what's going on a day-to-day basis on spending and keywords and stuff. So yeah, be interesting. Just finish up, I guess. What have you got anything kind of interesting coming up? Any other kind of chats or blogs coming out?
I wish I knew. I can't think beyond tomorrow. Yeah, I'm speaking at a bunch of conferences. I'm at SEMrush Spotlight and then SMX Munich in March and a bunch of stuff in between, Friends of Search. I'll probably write some more blog stuff soon. I've not got a book to push because every time I think about writing it, I realize that it would all go out of date immediately. I wrote a 6,000 word blog post about fonts this week, which probably should have been a book. But yeah, go check. I want to know that about the deepest, darkest nuances of how typography on the web works and how to make it personally accessible. Yeah, super nerdy. Probably don't, actually. You've got better things to do with your time.
No, that actually sounds really cool. I know a couple of people in my company that would definitely be interested in that. So yeah, thanks for joining me today. It's been really awesome, really great conversation. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It was a treat.